Well, hello everybody. Today I'm back with another video on Copic watercolor. I've showed you a couple different ways to do it, and this is a third for people especially who are used to palettes and brushes. I'm going to use the re-inkers instead of using the markers, and these are the colors that I'm using. I'll list them as we get through the video here, but I've put some into a palette. It's just a little cheapy palette that I got at my local art store. And I will link you to one in the doobly-doo down below along with all the products used in this video. I'm using the colorless blender instead of water, of course, for my moisture, and I've got a 2, 4, and 6 Grumbacher brush. I wasn't sure what I'd use, so I got them all out, as well as a big fat brush, but I didn't end up using that one at all either. And I'm going to just start creating some little piles of color, little pools and puddles of various colors, and I'm learning some things as I do this video, so you are going to hopefully do as I say and not as I do, because there are a few things that I've discovered that I did here that I would not do if I did it again. And what I started doing was putting color in the bodies, and now I'm putting a little bit of a wash of the W4, the warm gray, on the backs of my little hedgies, the spines. And I like to put a warm and a cool gray together, so I decided to start with the warm gray and just put a light coat of that down first, and moved on and went back to the bodies to get them going. So I have 2 browns. The E02 is a light color, and then the E15 is a dark one. And what I discovered, this was my worst part of this image and painting this, was that I think the E15 was possibly too dark, because what I kept doing is as I added more of it to try to add more shadow, it got too dark, and then I would try to add more colorless blender, and then it would get too light, and it just went back and forth. And I think if I had used an E13, it might have worked better, because I wouldn't have been so tempted to use so much colorless blender. Because the colorless blender is making it bleed like mad, and that's part of what makes it Copic watercolor, is the bleeding, but you have to be prepared for that and either be ready to stop before the end of your stamped line or be ready to repair it, which is what I'm going to end up doing at the end of this video. Because I'll put some ground underneath of it, and when I do that, it's going to push the color back up into the hedgehogs. And in general, it's watercolor, and watercolor is expected to bleed, so don't stress out about it too much, because that's kind of the look of watercolor. But you know me, I'm kind of a control freak, so I kind of like having some control over where the colors go. And I will be linking you to my controlled Copic watercolor video, which is much more my preferred method. This was fun, but this was fun as an experiment. It's not something that I think I will use on a regular basis, just because it's not the way I create. I like having more control and knowing that when I put the color down, it's going to stay there. Here with all this colorless blender, it's just going to keep on moving until that colorless blender evaporates. So I'm adding my cool gray now to the backs of my hedgies and coloring their spines. And I have kind of some lines drawn in, and then adding some colorless blender to blend that color into the warm gray. I like having the both grays. It seems to add more interest to it to me than just having one or the other. And you'll notice the light is coming from the right side, so it's on the left of both hedgies. It's not on the outside back of both hedgies, it's on the left side of both of the shapes. So if you look at them as little balls, then they have the same shadows, but it falls on different places because they're facing different directions. So now that my hedgies' little tummies have bled like crazy, I'm going to let that dry. That's what I should have done, and I think to eliminate some of the bleeding, if you put the color down, let it dry completely, and then start working back into it, you're not going to have as much bleeding. So do as I say, not as I do. And here I started painting the background, and I'm using a lot of the colorless blender to do that. And one of the things that I considered doing was wiping out that section, because it has some gray in the colorless blender, so it's going to gray out my blue a little bit. And what I decided was, since I was using this expensive colorless blender, I didn't want to waste it. And so I just continued using it even though it's got a little bit of that grayish color in it. And I think it ended up coming out really sweet anyway, so I'm not too upset with myself. You can use, in this particular kind of technique, you can use some 99% isopropyl alcohol to water everything down instead of the colorless blender. But please make sure you never put isopropyl alcohol into your colorless blender pens. You will ruin them, and it's not a good thing. But if you're using a brush like this, this is a great place to use that. Or you can use the alcohol for cleanup as well, because that's a great way to do it inexpensively, and it's more accessible sometimes. Although I think the lower percentage is easier to find than the 99%. But the 99% works as well as the colorless blender as far as cleanup and things. The other one is much tougher to clean up with. Okay, so I added some pink to my blue, so I have some purplish colors, and you'll see as it dries, it's going to get a little bit brighter because that colorless blender is going to dry out and it won't be as gray because that moisture will be gone. And now I'm going to use my RV23 to paint the ground underneath them. And I use the pink color because if it doesn't push all that brown back up into my hedgies, it won't be as noticeable as if I had used a gray in the ground or another color. So I went in, since I knew I wasn't going to be able to paint my little hearts, I went in with a marker to do that. Same RV23 that I used for the sky in the background. And then I took my Copic Original Body 0 marker, the colorless blender pen. This one has a hard nib. It has the bullet nib, and for detail work, I like these bullet nibs. I have a bunch of colors that I've gotten now with the bullet nibs so that I can start doing more of the detail work with those instead of trying to use my nib to make a little tiny dot or something. So I really like those. And it's either called the Copic Original or the Copic when you go shopping for one. Links will all be in the doobly-doo, of course. Here's the finished card. All I did was add it to a card base with some dimensional adhesive because it was so cute. It didn't need anything else. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please click that like button. You can click the link in the upper right for more information on my blog. And here are 2 more techniques for Copic watercolor if you want to get some more information. And I will see you guys in my next video. Take care. Have a great day. Bye-bye.